Well, hi, everyone. This is Dan Halsey with Southwoods Ecosystems and United Designers here for the Global Earth Repair Conference Global Check-In. And I'm here with Angus Sautar, who's, I think you're in Scotland. Is that where you are right now, Angus?
I'm just over the border into England, Dan, yes. But I'm a Scot who moved south a wee bit.
Okay. And we're going to talk to Angus about the questions like we've been doing these discussions and see his input and his views of what's been going on in the patterns of his life and also with the climate in the area. So welcome, Angus. Thank you for taking the time.
Great to be here, Dan. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. So our first question for you is, having been in that area, I think most of your life, if not all of your life, you've obviously had time to see changes. And so what I'd like to know from you is, what do you recall the climate having been in the past? Where is it now? And where do you think it's going? And what are those trends?
So the climate here on the edge of the Atlantic has always been unpredictable. And I guess the difficulty is that as we grow older, sometimes we edit out the worst bits of our youth. And some people have the idea of the English summer, of perpetual sunshine when you're on the holiday, as we say, from school, the long summer holiday. On the other hand, I started my life in Scotland, and I definitely got memories of cool Augusts, being in one-horse towns, as you'd probably say, with the rain coming down, and it's not much of a holiday at all. So we've always had a varied climate. What I've picked up maybe the last 10 years has been the extremes. Mm-hmm. And so it's still very variable here, and we get loads of when we get rain, it seems to rain heavier. We've had some spells when it gets really dry, and so there's big differences. We're getting probably less hard, what we call a hard winter, less snow and ice, and maybe the last few years it's difficult to see whether it's a trend, but we do get dry spells. And it doesn't take long for a dry spell here for things like, I'm in the uplands of northern England, and we had two very bad moorland fires last year. And it only seemed to me that we'd only been a few weeks without water. And it was enough for the peat and the heather to dry out, and then anything will set it off. Mm. And those fires raged for weeks, and they caused quite a lot of ecological damage. It's a very sensitive upland system there. We seem to be getting more floods. So when it rains more heavily, and I think there's flood mitigation that the government tries to do, but I'm not sure whether those strategies are always moving in the right direction, because we just seem to move the floods from one town further downstream to another one.
Right.
So milder and wetter, and the winds might be becoming stronger, but this is all anecdotal, and I haven't really studied the records. From what I hear, we're getting more extremes, which is, if we thought about it scientifically, it's exactly what we'd expect. Mm-hmm. I've only recently started taking and noticing the jet stream. So the jet stream that comes over the North Atlantic, and that seems to be completely in charge of our weather. And the winds, again, recent years, the winds seem to be getting in from unusual directions. Because seasonally, we expect a very windy March, and we know at some stage the winds are going to come. And that old saying we have about March, that if it comes in like a lamb, it goes out like a lion. Mm-hmm. Or if the wind comes in like a lion at the beginning of March, it goes like a lamb, and we have this nice April. And then April, we're expecting 4 seasons in one day and lots of showers as opposed to storms and all those things.
Sure.
Last April, we got a Siberian wind, and it just chilled everything off, and it was really difficult to get stuff going. Yeah, I'm just ready for more extremes.
Yeah, yeah. as things are, but you kind of seen the progression of the extremes are becoming more extreme, let's just say. And would you say that there's also, as far as things being spread out, you have extreme events, and that are with bookends of no rain at all or something, so things come all at once and not like spread over time.
Yeah, that can happen, but I think here it's also so unpredictable. It's quite a we're on the edge, really, the Atlantic edge here.
Right.
The big continents of Europe and Central Asia, and the big Atlantic Ocean. So all bets are off really here.
Sure. So what's the most important adaptation you think that people or the government or the region should be thinking about for the coming changes?
I think that one of the important ones is to hold water up in the landscape. And it's very interesting for me because exactly the strategy that work for my colleagues who are working in drylands are extremely useful here in terms of mitigating against flooding, which becomes, so that's becoming an increasing problem. And also we're running into trouble during the dry periods with not enough water, certainly for recreation and all those sort of issues. They had to close the Leeds-Liverpool Canal a few summers ago because the compensation reservoirs up in the hills had run dry. And that's loss of livelihood for a lot of people. It's not a commercial route anymore. It's a small narrowboat canal. But there's a lot of leisure and tourism opportunities and tourism. And those businesses got really caned because there wasn't enough water in the hills. And we're talking about hills that sometimes get, on the higher areas, we sometimes get 3 meters a year of rainfall.
Wow.
So I think we're spoiled here because it's usually raining, so there's not much need to do much about it. Whereas I think that there really is, and I think that this is a huge wasted resource in terms of water power. And I've certainly got colleagues looking at the old-fashioned water power devices like ram pumps and tromps, and this is before we get to any thoughts of generating electricity from water. And some of the places where there's a good fall on the river, there's some micro hydro going in. I think there could be a lot more of that. And so we're both mitigating against flooding and using water more for energy. I think in terms of the other big thing for us is trying to grow food in this sort of variable climate. It's usually cool. We're in a cool temperate zone. We got frosts over the winter. We're still getting frost in the morning here, so it's difficult to get plants away. But I think the main thing will be to let things get enough sunshine. So I think there's some technological fixes that could be done in terms of growing things in, I think, what you would call hoop houses, or you would say polytunnels, right. But also just custom-made structures that are there to catch the light and keep the heat in. I think I'm seeing some really neat innovation on that. And whereas the big outfits are still, like we grow tomatoes out near where I live, near the coast. And there's huge glass houses there, but they're very energy dependent. But they can produce tomatoes economically against bringing stuff in from Spain, because they're so clever with it. But I think a slight rise in fuel might knock that one on the head. Sure, I see. So I think there's a lot can be done in reconfiguring the food supply here, and if we do that, then we can mitigate against climate change at the same time. Well, I don't see many signs of that happening. We don't seem to be in a particularly innovative environment where it really counts with the small farmers and growers. When you talk about holding water in the highland area, do you have to have new structures? How do you increase the capacity up there to hold that water until you need it? No, I think you just do the thing that I've learned that they do in Australia, and the old Percy Yeoman's thing about you look for the point in the landscape where the slope is evening out, and then you do some fairly low-tech earth wall dams, and you try and cover as large an area as possible. There's lots of rough pasture and moorland and all of those kind of things that'd be much better managed as wetland and water.
I see. And infiltration then. Yeah,
and so those you could manage those to be your kind of water storage, and so you could run them as say extensive wetland areas, and so they wouldn't just be for energy or for compensating the canals and rivers when they get dry, or for flood control. You could actually integrate those into your agriculture and your growing systems, I think. And
sure.
Especially, trees work well with that kind of thing. So there's lots of land which isn't at all productive. Certainly in the upland areas where I live, it's just often a matter of the only income is putting sheep on it, which prevents the development of woodland, which could be a lot more productive, I think.
Sure. So our last question for you then is, in your opinion, what action needs to be taken as things become more extreme and as we find out more the realities of climate change and what's actually happening? And it seems like the numbers keep changing, not surprisingly, getting worse, and things are accelerating. What do you think should happen in order to avoid a serious climate tragedy in the UK or other areas?
I think it's a matter of landowners responding to the threats. And so I'm not a significant landowner. All I can do is advise people who talk to me. There are some individuals who can see the benefits of this. So I come from a place where I can't do much about this except advise people who are holding land in those areas, and I'm available to do that sort of almost constantly, because I think that's very important work. But from my point of view, I've already got plenty on, and so I think we have to get the advantage. Each landowner has to get the advantages out of the land that they've got, which for me means taking this permaculture approach and really getting better yields and forgetting all this monoculture stuff. Whether they're just doing trees or whether they're just got reservoirs, lakes, whatever. We have to think about multiple yields coming off the land, and I think it's up to each landowner to get the best effects of their local position. It's going to be different for everybody, and therefore I'm basically, the other thing is to train up other people to do what I can do, so that those folks who do have the land have always got some advice. And this is taking us into the realm that I'm in at the moment. Actually, it's the social issues that we have to address. The technological solutions are all there. Mm-hmm. And so we have to ask questions like, why aren't we making more progress, and what more can I do?
Sure. Now, a couple of people that we've talked to in the past have been talking about, and I hate to use the words like relocation or immigration, things like that, but about getting people back on the land and out of the cities, and so we can have more smaller villages and more smaller farms that can manage more complex systems for growing food. Sure.
I think we're going to have to face this in the coming years, should we get sea level rise. And I think we're going to get sea level rise. So we're on an island here. There's a couple of islands. There's Ireland, and then there's the rest of the what used to be known as the British Isles. So there's a significant amount of low-level land that's at risk. So we're going to have to plan for relocation. So that's going to mean that some of these empty upland areas are going to have to be adapted for people there. So I can see that that's going to happen. And I think, again, in a small way, I advise people when they're buying a property to check the elevation above sea level.
especially anywhere near the shoreline, I would guess.
These are the things that I just gently suggest to people they do when they consider relocation, because I'm not going to go around and knock on doors and ask people to move. That's not my job. My job is to advise people who want to do future proofing. So I think more and more we'll see people being advised against buying these new houses that are built in the floodplain or anywhere near the coastal area where the sea might come up. And so these are interesting areas, and some of my colleagues are looking at them because there will be relocation and we're going to have to accommodate more people in the uplands. And traditionally we stayed away from that because it's more difficult to build structures there, but we've got a good history of doing it. Of course, this is making things more difficult when we're talking about relocation. When I just, again, we're going to lose agricultural land. These are big challenges, but I think we make a start by people taking the lead and going ahead and doing it. As far as what we're going to do with the cities are concerned, I think I have to accept the cities as facts at the moment. And certainly in the British Isles, rather than try and move people out into the country, into little villages, which is going to be politically very difficult at the moment, I think we've got to start looking at the cities as a series of towns and villages, which actually a lot of our big cities, they used to be. London is a great example. I've lived in London. When I lived in London in the 70s, it was a series of towns, and people had a great sense of place. They knew where they lived. And it was only when we got the changes of the 1980s that we actually got mass movement of people moving out of London and the money moving in, and a sort of totally different, we basically got destruction of communities. And this has political consequences. And I think interesting that Brexit, the whole Brexit, whatever it is an example of this, because a lot of the people who were displaced out of London by the money that moved in are the ones who are most fervently against the European Union. Why, I don't know, but that's a whole different set of stories. So these things are all, it's all very well to come up with things in theory, but in terms of practice, I think we have to accept the limiting factors a lot of the time. And the limiting factors are that at the moment, we're not going to get a lot of people to actually relocate. And so we have to try and make things better for where they are. And so I'm trying to, again, like permaculture work at the margins, people who do move, get them to make intelligent decisions about where they're going to move. And yeah, I'm supporting eco-village startups, and but none of this is particularly easy. And but the good thing about it is that it'll trailblaze, it'll show other people the way. And so I never discourage things, but I think my sense is we're going to get a series of people struggling against the tide and establishing new stuff. And if we can get a bit of that, then there will be something and some patterns for the bulk of people to switch over to very quickly in case of an emergency.
Sure.
And that'd be the strategy I'd work on. But I'm certainly giving up on the political will in this part of Europe to suddenly create new garden cities and villages out in the country and to move people into it.
Right. So they would have to be if there was going to be something like that, it'd be very well organized, intentional communities, which again, difficult to do in a difficult time in a different area.
Yeah, the big issue here is access to land, because and the land ownership structures and the expense of land. I mean, I know people who can build a house and who have for somewhere between £6,000 and £10,000. So we say sort of $10,000, $15,000. But the average price of a family house is it's more than 10 times that. It's probably about 20 times that. And because of all this stuff about the land and the way that the big corporates build houses and all of this sort of stuff, you know, most young people in England whose families haven't got houses have now given up hope of ever owning their own home. And you can buy a bit of, you know, planning rules are really tight here, so you can buy a bit of land at a reasonable price, but they won't let you build anything on it. And as soon as you can build on it, the land price can go up 20 times,
sure,
50
right.
times.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, you've got a political and economic system that's mitigating against all sorts of sensible behavior from people. I wouldn't want to abandon the planning rules because they came in for a good reason, which is to prevent sprawl. And again, the last thing we want is energy sprawl with huge suburban settlements and people stuck with no, you know, you imagine a fuel crisis, people would be stuck out in the middle of nowhere with no access to, well, access to what?
Mm-hmm. Right, right.
And so the more I reflect on it, the more it becomes more and more complex. And I keep saying to people about the history in our islands, where really it's one of the birthplaces of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution didn't start as a matter of policy. And I can't see the next sort of set of revolutions starting as a matter of policy either. Mm. And in fact, we're already into the next revolution, which is started by a whole load of entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. And I'm not finding that a particularly helpful thing. But again, this hasn't arisen much out of policy. Sure. Governments are following these big corporates. They're not. Right. They're not leading the process. And so, I'm looking for where these next, I don't like to call them revolutions, but the next evolutionary stage comes from. Mm-hmm. And because it's about I think it's about the local and the particular. And if there was a solution to the world's problems, there was one solution, then somebody had come up with it by now. Even although we can argue that about the political climate and the economy and all this thing, I think it would be becoming clear to people. It's not clear to me that there's one solution. And the only hope I have, as I've said before, is for us to really work with the local and particular and get stuff out of that universal solutions would have no hope of even recognizing or achieving.
True, because they all have to be so specific.
Yeah, and so when I'm working with people I know are working well, you know, certainly my permaculture friends, I will tend to say that climate change is a huge distraction because we are already working the best we can. I've got friends who are working the best they can to get these small local systems in place. And the challenge for us is to do, well, what we're doing now, and to connect up and share good practice. It's not to connect up and impose solutions.
Right. That's an excellent phrase. Excellent point. Good quote to get from you too on that. Well, I'd like to get to your presentation too. Did you have something specific that you wanted to show us or share screen?
I've been doing quite a few talks and presentations. So, and it covers quite a wide range. So I'm not sure which is the most appropriate one, but I think when a bit after we met, I had one that I did at the International Convergence on Permaculture and Energy. Mm-hmm. Recently, I've been looking at the history of the Industrial Revolution and the problem of bigness and the whole social issues around industrialization and how we managed to deindustrialize and get more local. Mm-hmm. And so that's one. And then I have my other one, which was my distractions. Maybe I'll just take you through the one that I did for on the fringe of the UK Association. Here we are. Now wait a minute, I've got to share screen.
Yeah, in the bottom there's a little green
line.
Box.
I can I can do that. I'm just checking that I know where to find my things, because
Okay.
I want you to follow me through. Have you got me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So this one.
Very good.
So this was just an evening talk, and I had loads of university students and things like that. So I started off speaking about the Luddites, who were the people who saw who worked at home, and they saw the Industrial Revolution coming. And the contemporary accounts were they had reasonable standard of life and good family life. And then, you know, within about 20 years, the Industrial Revolution had taken off, and people were basically forced off the land and into these big factories. And you had huge growth in the cities alongside the factories, and you got appalling working conditions. And we certainly in this part of the world had the original Luddites, who were actually not against machines, because they were hand loom weavers. So they used machines, but they were in their own homes, and they were concerned about the removal of work from the home. But they got this bad press, because the victors always write the history, don't they? Mm-hmm. So I'm using this framework from Kirkpatrick Sale. What happens with the pattern seems to be that, first of all, you get the imposition of technology, then you get the destruction of the past, and then with the manufacture of things becomes the manufacture of needs. So at the same time as the factories pick up, then you get advertising and marketing coming in almost for the first time. Then you've got the ordeal of labor as machines take over and human beings become lower skilled and cheaper operatives. You get the conquest of nature, and Kirkpatrick Sale's point was that it was all done in the service of the state. So I thought that was good. So the imposition, so I'm just sort of, we've got this TV joke here about the computer says no, you can't. So just some things about that. The destruction of the past, well, there's less presumably, if I'm moving this, you can see that better, can you? Less face-to-face contact, disruption of family life, barriers to social discourse. Well, you could argue that with smartphones, couldn't you? Decreasing human autonomy, limiting of individual choice, and the devaluation of personal skills. Interesting. Mm-hmm. So, of course, then you've got the manufacture of needs just means more and more stuff, which a lot of my colleagues and students are painfully aware of at the moment. Here you are, Halloween. All this stuff for Halloween, mainly plastic. And then even the pumpkins are not composted. They're just thrown into landfill.
A terrifying number of Halloween pumpkins. That's like scary right there.
Yes, yeah. And so, you know, waste. And never is permaculture got more opportunity. So, you know, I just fast forward 200 years from the plight of the English peasants and the working class, and you just find that, you know, there's still stuff going on, like Gil Scott Heron in New York, and Whitey on the Moon, and the revolution will not be televised, and all this kind of thing. Then you got the Caribbean, with all the reggae bands like Toots and the Maytals saying how tough life is. And this is the 1970s, which would probably peak happiness, they're saying, like in the Western world, 1970s. So usually it's the artists and the writers and everything which take up the plight of people who are suffering from the imposition of technology. I'm getting out of order a bit here, but I'm just only said one thing environmental in the whole of this talk. People were getting very puzzled because they thought I was permaculture, and when was I going to say something about the environment? So we got a central electricity generating station near us that was shut down 25 years ago, and now there's trees growing all over it, and they're growing out of the brickwork of the buildings that have been left and all of that. And so I said, it's not nature I'm worried about, it's us. Mm-hmm. And of course, being in Manchester, you've got this thing, you look at the way that the Luddite protests were put down, and you have to come to the conclusion that resistance is futile. And they were told that this violence and destruction of property was no good, so people had to protest peacefully. So this is what they did almost exactly 200 years ago in Manchester. And we got what was called the Peterloo Massacre, which was a peaceful protest of people going out demanding the vote or asking for the vote. And it was like a family outing and a big procession, just like the ones they still have in Manchester against the Iraq war and all of those kind of things, and against climate change. It would be the same kind of thing. And unfortunately, the government in those days was very, very twitchy, because they'd had the French Revolution recently and everything. So even this peaceful protest, they unleashed the militia on them. And they went riding into the crowd with horses, and they trampled people, and they had sabers flying and all of this. And 19 people died, and about 400 injured. And there's going to be a commemoration walk in Manchester, I think, this year to commemorate that. There's been a film out about it. So wow. This was, we're talking 1819. It was about 1850 before you saw any appreciable amelioration of the plight of ordinary people. And of course, in service of the state, this is the miners' strike that happened in the 1980s in Yorkshire, where there was the miners got a bit threatening, and the police charged them on horseback with batons flying. But hey, you're in the USA, you've seen all this sort of stuff, haven't you? Fortunately, we don't have it here as often. And then we had when a lot of the youngsters from the No Hope after the Reagan-Thatcher era kicked in, they went travelling on the road, and they got rounded up in some field of beans somewhere near, because they were going to go to Stonehenge for the midsummer. And their vehicles got wrecked, and they got battered around the heads and everything. And so this is my point to the youngsters, that resistance is futile. But I quickly turn this around and say defiance is necessary. I told the story about the first woman in Manchester to vote, which is about 1850. And she got the vote because she owned property, and property owners had the vote, so she got her papers, so she voted. Anyway, so there's a few stories like that, but I'm getting concerned about the digital revolution, that it's going in exactly the same way. The imposition of technology, the kind of the psychology of clicking things, right. The kind of dislocation you have when the computer goes wrong. So again, we can do the defiance thing and so say no to huge amounts of energy used to keep pictures of kittens alive. So this is a key thing. This crosses over to my energy stuff. As the cost of energy goes up, then the amount of discretionary spending on things like investment in the future and like fixing things gets what's the word?
It diminished.
It actually affects it, because you've got this discretionary spending on keeping your society together, and it shrinks to that because, you know, with the likes of fracking, you're putting more and more energy to this and higher energy costs. In fact, if you use biofuels, I think biofuels are net energy consumers. And the key thing is to look at about the energy return on energy invested.
Right.
And once that starts to get over 10%, like it does with fracking and everything, you begin to see the trouble emerging. And this is from a guy called Tim Morgan, and he's doing more work, and he's plotting the decline in prosperity. He's saying, never mind the GDP and all these sort of phony statistics. You're actually getting decline in prosperity throughout the Western world. And one of the worst places you're seeing is France. And that's one of the first places you're seeing the Gilets jaunes riots and this kind of thing. And he's putting it all down to this. So as energy becomes more expensive, it becomes more and more difficult to keep up the kind of society that we want. So again, I become even more leery about asking the government to do things, because I don't think the government's going to be able to hold things together. There's a guy called Tainter, I think, a US academic, who looks at the decline and fall of empires. And he says the case study we have to look at is the decline of the Eastern Roman Empire, which is the one, the Byzantine Empire. centered on Constantinople. Because the first time round, when the Western Empire fell to the barbarians, they actually managed to scale down. And what they did, they basically abandoned the army and a lot of the apparatus of the state, and they retreated to sort of more localities with militias. And they held the thing together for another 200 years. And then they tried to put the empire back together again, at which point it was all destroyed by probably by the Moorish people, the Arabs, the Muslims. So we're up, but this time round, you see, we're up against resource constraints, because some of the metals in your smartphone are going to be really difficult to get hold of in about 20 years' time.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's like in Minneapolis or Chicago, but in Manchester, I'm reliably informed that the new buildings that are going up have got, certainly commercial ones, have got a lifetime of about 25 years. How much longer are we going to be able to find the materials to replace those buildings? But more importantly, the energy, to make all the cement and the concrete and the steel. This is, everybody's carrying on as if it's business as usual, but it's not.
Even to recycle them would be a huge amount of energy.
Even to recycle them, exactly. And then especially if you're using loads of cement and glass and everything, how the hell do you recycle that? You can at a local level, because you make your hot houses and your chicken houses and everything out of them. But at the city scale, I don't know. But you've got the rise of the robots. Of course, we had an interesting one of our major home delivery companies, completely automatic warehouse. They recently had a fire, which knocked them back a bit. But they lost a whole load of robots, because, of course, these sort of robots can't run out of the warehouse.
You're right, they can't leave.
So this is all your kind of risk analysis.
Yeah.
Who's good at this? The guy who's good at this is Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He's got some good case studies about risk analysis, about the casinos at Las Vegas, where they try and check out the customers and everything to see whether they're going to be cheating. And they've got all sorts of ways of looking at. And yeah, one of the casinos really ran into trouble because they kidnapped the daughter of the guy who owned the casino and demanded a huge ransom.
Oh my!
So this is, I think, the baseball metaphor is it a baseball metaphor about thinking outside the box, or is that something different?
I don't know which box that is, but we just try to think outside the box. Yeah.
Think outside the box. Well, it's a good metaphor. Let's not get ourselves boxed in. You've got to think about the wider aspects of what's going on. So we've got the rise of the robot. I don't think so. Not in permaculture projects. So, so I'm coming back here to the positive part of my presentation about where do we make a start. We've got duty of care to the planet, and we're going to get the key thing that faces us as permaculture designers is to get the advantages of place rather than the disadvantages.
Right.
The advantages of the small scale. A great book, this Stuart Brand book, about how buildings learn. It's very good for permaculture designers to read, because there's some good stuff in here about buildings, but the key thing is a strategy that says when you're converting that whole thing. You know this book?
No, I haven't.
No, there's a video series, a good video series on it as well. It basically says that architects design buildings and then people move into them and make them work.
Oh, I see.
Because they never really work when people move in, so they change them. Right. Of course, these two things here. This is the architect's plan, and this is New Orleans, I think, and these are buildings fairly recently. But the whole thing about this, and I know about this, when you're working on your house or your workshop or whatever it is, you adapt it slowly, and you make many small changes. I keep saying to my students, you have a concept of what you want, but often the building is preventing you. What you need to do is start somewhere and begin working on it. But if you work on it over a whole period of time, you learn as you go along. And some of your original ideas, you might think, well, that's not such a good idea now. And Stuart Brand's thing is that a series of small, low-risk solutions over a long period of time gives you high value.
Mm. Right.
And that sort of immediately struck a site with me, well, what we're trying to do with the clients that have got the bigger sites. You've got to think ahead and think about where the trees are. And so you have to think pretty deeply about that, because you can't afford to make too many mistakes with that, because it's going to take you such a long time. But I keep telling my students, the last thing you do is to do everything at once. You don't do, I mean, we've had a whole raft of TV makeover shows where people move out and somebody moves into their yard or their house and does a makeover over a weekend. And I keep saying that this is the anathema of permaculture design. We don't do that sort of thing.
Right.
Because some people get really pissed off as well if you go at it like that. But the main thing is you don't get the value by responding to the niche that you're in and really working that niche to make things work for you.
I can imagine it would be, you can imagine, even on the outside, I've been in our place for about 15 years, and in the slow development, of our farm, you also learn in that process as you do all these things. If I all of a sudden showed up one day and everything was in, I'd be overwhelmed with ignorance.
Yeah.
Of all this works.
Exactly. So we mustn't underestimate what a big change in thinking this is from the way that most everybody's going around, certainly in our country here. Right.
And as we're talking about climate change, it's the slow and small solution is to ramp up gradually, so you learn as you go, not wait until it's an emergency and you have to make dramatic changes.
Exactly. So this is the thing that really worries me, that we're not going to have enough people demonstrating, especially around food and energy, how things can be done at the local level. And the challenges are mainly economic at the moment, because there's loads of people who start projects and business and they've got good sense, but they're not economically viable. And unless you've got a good, unless you're well resourced, not necessarily money, but you have to be well resourced to keep the show on the road, you eventually lose the project. So you lose the demonstration of all the good things that are actually working. We're producing food, we're distributing food, we're repairing things, we're doing up buildings, all of those things. But you only need one little slip in terms of the financial slip, and you can lose the whole bloody lot.
Right, for sure.
So again,
go ahead.
Small and slow. That's what I was going to say, Dan. Yeah.
Right. No, that's exactly. I just we're going to be running out of time here, so I don't want to miss any more of your presentation. I know that I'm kind of talking in here.
Well, take an example of food. The point is that you can open the thing up. People get this fixed idea about permaculture and food and energy project. We need people from all different walks of life when we get a project going. If we're going to put in a solar farm or a food farm or something, we're going to need people from all sorts of backgrounds. So the point is that people don't have to be particularly skilled to join in to do it. Here's a food distribution business that I'm involved in. And I could talk about that. But the great one, really, that if I had to present anything that's happening in our region, is this thing about Incredible Farm. They had a bit of a rehearsal on this. We're sort of growing on a small scale, but somebody's rented them a beat-up old valley up in the hills, and within a year, they've put all this stuff in and started growing food in it. And in the kind of climate we've got, I think it was quite a good summer, really, for growing last year, but it's just been a phenomenal achievement. And this gives me great hope, because I guess you see this is actually, I think it's an old dam reservoir site, and it's silted up because there's industrial stuff further down the valley here. But so this bit's all boggy. They haven't touched a bit. Most of it was like this, or else it was really low-grade pasture and a bit of scrub. But they've got, especially this growing house they built. Have I got a picture of it? Yeah, there you are. They built that growing house in a matter of months, in time for last year's growing season. So wow. I've got loads of pictures of that project. There's I can send you the link. We wrote this up in our newsletter.
That'd be great to see, because then we can attach it to make it available.
I'll give you the little write-up for our newsletter. I've got it open somewhere. So this is nearly done. This is a church in Manchester that was really run down, and they got loads of room in the building. They started taking in homeless people. And then one of my colleagues thought, well, she'd help them do a productive garden on the lawn. And then this is what it was like about 5 months later.
Mm-hmm.
That's the front of the church. And then there's things for the homeless guys to do, etc., etc.
Sure, sure.
And then, you know, take over in building, volunteers take over an old building in down in Cheshire, and do all sorts of good things with it. Thanks for listening, Dan.
Well, thank you, Angus. This is wonderful. It's great to see you again and talk to you again. And I hope we can do this more, and we'll try and check in. Hopefully we can do also live when we're at the site, but I'm going to keep in touch.
Yeah, let's keep going. I'd certainly like, when all the fun's over, I'd like to have a check-in with you, because I'm feeling a bit isolated on the permaculture side of things. And
sure,
you know, just a bit of global networking.
Yes,
and find out more what you're up to. I'm intrigued because you seem to be sending emails from a university account.
Yeah, it's one of the assets of having a connection to a university. Besides all the resources, you have in the email account that never goes away, so I can always trust that one. I use that one to as other things change, the university, you know, for better or worse, as other things change, the university, it never seems to change. It's always the same.
Yeah, well, we can certainly talk about that, but yeah. I'll let you get on now.
Okay.
And let's do something soon. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye.